El Cid is one of the most well-known figures of the Reconquista, and he's regarded nowadays as a Spanish national hero and champion of Christianity. But during his life, he was more than just that. He was a knight, a mercenary, an outlaw, and a warlord, and he fought for both sides of the Reconquista, attacking the Moors when they were weak, and helping them defend themselves when his relationship with the Christian kings was sour. At the end of his life, he had proven his military prowess and had become a legend, inspiring with his tale one of the oldest Castilian epic poems of history. Welcome to our video on the legend of two worlds, Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar. When Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar was born in 1043, the Iberian Peninsula was in a period of great change. The Caliphate of Córdoba was collapsing. Dozens of little Muslim states, known as typhas, were becoming independent. The Christian kingdoms were rapidly expanding and turning against each other. And in the Castilian lands, a new state was rising. Here's where Rodrigo was born, in the burgeoning city of Burgos, amidst an illustrious family. His father, Diego Lainez, was a Castilian knight of impressive bravery, fighting for King Fernando the Great on the frontiers with the Kingdom of Navarre. Through this campaigning, Diego conquered several settlements in Castile, including the towns of Viva and Uviena, which he came to own and then left as inheritance for his son. Upon his father's death, Rodrigo was left a young and rich landlord that wanted to follow in his footsteps and become a renowned knight just like him. Prince Sancho the Strong, one of Fernando's sons that governed the province of Castile, saw the potential in Rodrigo and took him into his entourage to complete his military education. With Sancho, Rodrigo experienced his first military campaigns against the typha of Zaragoza, concluding with Emir al-Muqtadir surrendering unconditionally and becoming a vassal of the Castilian prince. As his new vassal was also threatened by the Kingdom of Aragon, Sancho then took Rodrigo to the city of Graus, where the two Christian armies battled for dominance of Zaragoza. This was Rodrigo's first battle, and the young knight fought with such braveness and ferocity that Sancho honored him with a distinguished title for his service. In 1065, King Fernando would die, dividing his realm amongst his sons and daughters, and Sancho would become the first king of Castile as a result. By this time, Rodrigo was already one of the most renowned warriors in the Iberian Peninsula, and he was also a good friend to King Sancho, acting as his preferred knight and having the honor of carrying the royal banner. Because he thought himself the legitimate heir to King Fernando, Sancho attempted throughout his reign to reunite the Spanish kingdoms under his name. Consequently, he warred against his brothers, in particular against King Alfonso of Leon. In these years, Rodrigo met Alfonso's forces in several pitched battles, demonstrating great courage and thus increasing his personal prestige. The wars between the brothers culminated at the famous Battle of Golpejera, where the forces of Castile and Leon clashed in a chaotic struggle for the dominance of both kingdoms. Initially, the Leonese were expelled and had to retreat, but then King Alfonso reinforced his army and led it back to meet the Castilians. After a fierce fight, the Castilians were pushed back, and King Sancho barely managed to escape alive. But while they were retreating, Rodrigo stepped in and advised his king to turn back and counterattack the Leonese army, thinking that Alfonso's forces would still be celebrating their victory with their guard down. Led by Rodrigo, the Castilians attacked with such ferocity that the Leonese never knew what hit them. Alfonso was captured and exiled, and Sancho became king of Leon. Rodrigo, meanwhile, became famous for his great victory and received the name Campeador, which means champion or master of the battlefield. With Leon and Galicia secured, the only realm left for Sancho to reunite was the lordship of Zamora, under the lands of his sister Urraca. During the siege of Zamora, Rodrigo's life would change forever as his friend and liege Sancho would be severely injured by an astute soldier, ending the siege and the monarch's life. For 9 months, Alfonso had been living in exile at the typha of Toledo when the news of his brother's death reached him. 9 months after his greatest defeat at the hands of Rodrigo, and now the exiled king returned to Leon to inherit all the lands that Sancho had strived in his lifetime to reunite. Yet despite his resentment against Rodrigo, Alfonso was a wise king, and he knew that it was better to retain Rodrigo's military expertise alongside him. To keep Rodrigo in his service, Alfonso decided to marry him with Ximena Diaz, one of his cousins. Rodrigo's relationship with Alfonso thus improved, and his marriage to Ximena was very beneficial as well, bringing him very close to high nobility and having 3 children with her. Although Rodrigo and Alfonso were now on better terms, Rodrigo wouldn't recover the high position he enjoyed with Sancho. Instead, King Alfonso's preferred knight would be Garcia Ordóñez, Count of Nájera, who would develop a fierce rivalry with Rodrigo. In 1079, Alfonso assembled his most trustworthy knights to collect tribute from his Moorish vassals, as they had a vassalage contract of protection with the Leonese king in exchange for annual tribute. Rodrigo was among these knights, and he was sent to the typha of Seville under the Emir al-Mu'tamid. When Rodrigo arrived at Seville, al-Mu'tamid was amidst an ongoing war with the typha of Granada, and so the Emir called Rodrigo to honor their contract and come to his defense. Concurrently, the Count of Nájera had been sent to Granada with the same objective, and he had been asked the same for the Emir of Granada, to which he gladly agreed. Rodrigo tried, to no avail, to peacefully resolve the conflict between the 2 typhas, but when the Count of Nájera invaded with a huge Moorish army, Rodrigo had no other choice but to interfere. At the castle of Cabra, he led the civilian army against that of Granada, and he won a great victory, capturing his rival in battle and further increasing his prestige. When he returned to Seville, al-Mu'tamid happily paid his tribute and also offered many gifts to Rodrigo for his bravery. As he got back to Leon, even Alfonso praised his ferocity in battle, although the Count of Nájera, now released from Rodrigo's imprisonment, falsely accused him of stealing part of the tribute for himself, which fell on the king's deaf ears. A year later, however, the Emir of Toledo attacked the castle of Gómez and was defeated by Rodrigo. The Castilian knight decided to pursue his foe without the agreement of King Alfonso, ransacking the countryside of Toledo as a result, which earned the ire of Alfonso, who was convinced by the envious Count of Nájera and other enemies of Rodrigo to exile him. Saddened by the news, Rodrigo took his wife and children and left to seek employment elsewhere, essentially working as a soldier of fortune. In Tharagotha, the Emir al-Muqtadir, old vassal of King Sancho and an old acquaintance of the Castilian knight, received him with open arms and trusted him with the defense of his state. But the Moor was very old and sick, and he would perish a few months later, dividing his realm between his 2 sons, with al-Mu'taman receiving the typha of Tharagotha and al-Mundir receiving the typha of Larida. Rodrigo would remain in the service of al-Mu'taman for 4 years, earning his trust and friendship, and occupying a high position in the court of Zaragoza. With his new patron, Rodrigo defended the Moorish realm from the armies of King Sancho of Aragon, Count Berenguer of Barcelona, and even from al-Mu'taman's brother, the Emir of Lerida. At the Battle of Almenar, for instance, the combined forces of Lerida and Barcelona were besieging the castle of Almenar with a huge army. First, Rodrigo attempted to pay them off, but Count Berenguer noticed that his army was bigger than that of Zaragoza, and so decided to refuse al-Mu'taman's payment, mocking him about Rodrigo's chances and continuing the siege instead. Irritated by his refusal, the knight ordered his men to arm themselves and started marching into battle. Thus Berenguer's forces were taken by surprise by the ferocious drive of Rodrigo's army, suffering huge casualties and the imprisonment of Count Berenguer himself. Another important battle came in 1084, as al-Mu'taman sent Rodrigo to ransack Lerida's lands and to attempt to conquer a route to the sea. This time, the Emir of Lemida managed to get an alliance with the King of Aragon, marching together to Morea with the objective of repelling the Castilian outcast. Rodrigo faced them with his smaller army, and after a grueling struggle, the Aragonese forces retreated, with Rodrigo in pursuit. The knight essentially destroyed his foe and captured more than 2,000 men. It's probably in this great victory that Rodrigo was first called Cidi by his Moorish soldiers, translated in Spanish into Cid, although there is no evidence of contemporary use of this name. That same year, Al-Mu'taman would die of old age and would be succeeded by his son Al-Musta'in, whom Al-Cid continued to serve for some time. But when the Almoravids entered into the Iberian Peninsula and defeated King Alfonso at the Battle of Sagrajas, Rodrigo was recalled back into Leon and was pardoned by Alfonso, who needed strong military men to face the Almoravid threat. Now reconciled with his liege, El Cid departed Castile at the head of a small army to vassalize the Typha of Valencia. There he managed to scare off the forces of the Count of Barcelona and those of Emir al-Qadir of Valencia, who then became a vassal to King Alfonso. In 1088, the Almoravids returned to the Iberian Peninsula to wage war upon the Christian kingdoms. Joined by the southern Typhus, they laid siege to the castle of Aledo, to which Alfonso marched to defend. Naturally, Alfonso asked his best knights, including Rodrigo, to join him in this struggle, but El Cid had a logistics problem, and he ended up waiting for his liege on a different route to that which Alfonso had taken. In the end, the Christians managed to win the day, although El Cid failed to join them in battle. For this, King Alfonso was very furious, and fueled by the Count of Najera's suspicions that Rodrigo was a traitor, he ended up exiling him for a second time. This time, however, all of Rodrigo's goods were taken, and his wife and children were imprisoned. Incensed by the actions of King Alfonso, El Cid marched to the Levante and established himself as an independent warlord, sacking the Typha of Larida and vassalizing the Typha of Valencia. For the second time, the Emir of Larida and the Count of Barcelona felt threatened by Rodrigo's might, and so decided to join forces to oust him. Being a good friend to El Cid, the Emir al-Musta'in of Tharagotha pledged his support for Rodrigo and alerted him of the impending attack. El Cid then placed his forces atop Mount Tevar and sent mocking letters to Count Berenguer with the objective of encouraging him to attack. This was very effective, so the Count launched a surprise night assault, which managed to encircle the army of Zaragoza. Surrounded, El Cid used his wit to set up a ruse to divide Berenguer's forces. He sent several Moorish soldiers to act as deserters and informed the Count that Rodrigo was going to escape through the mountains. Berenguer believed this, and so he divided his forces to cover the escape routes. There, the soldiers of Barcelona were ambushed and routed by Rodrigo's men. El Cid then reunited his forces and charged against the remaining soldiers of Berenguer. After a fierce struggle, Rodrigo came out on top again, resulting in the Count being imprisoned, along with 50 of his finest knights. Once the battle had concluded, the Castilian warlord treated them with great mercy and agreed to set them free in exchange for a huge tribute. The Count and El Cid would remain friends and would not fight each other ever again, with Rodrigo becoming the most powerful man in the Levante and establishing a protectorate over the Typhus of Lerida, Albarracin, Alpuente and Valencia. Using his newfound influence, El Cid brokered a peace between his friend Al-Musta'in and the King of Aragon. He negotiated with King Alfonso for the release of his family, and he even went so far as to raid the lands of the Count of Najera, his longtime rival. But in 1092, his dominance of the Levante was finally contested by the Almoravids, who managed to depose and execute the Emir al-Qadir of Valencia, taking control of the city and the surrounding lands. In response, El Cid gathered thousands of men and moved to the village of Caboya to prepare for the conquest of Valencia. The siege of Valencia lasted almost 9 months, and in the meantime, Rodrigo battled against some of his rebellious Moorish vassals, such as the Emir of Albarracin. In the end, the city had become depleted and had to concede defeat, opening the gate to El Cid's army. Victorious, Rodrigo established a lordship over the city, self-styling himself as Prince of Valencia. Angered by this turn of events, the Almoravids sent a huge army to reconquer the city, making camp at Cuerte to prepare for the siege. For several days, the Saracens laid siege to Rodrigo's capital, howling and shooting arrows against the walls of the city. But on the 10th day, El Cid gathered the defenders and launched a surprise assault against the Almoravid army. During the night, Rodrigo secretly left the city with most of his men to place them at the rear of the Almoravid camp at Cuerte. Meanwhile, at dawn, a small Christian force would exit the city through the western gate to draw the besieging army away from camp. Once the Muslim vanguard was far away, El Cid charged against the Almoravid camp with such strength and bravery that the Saracens were completely routed and quickly disbanded. At the same time, the vanguard of the Almoravids saw their rearguard collapse and thought that King Alfonso had come with reinforcements to lift the siege, so they also disbanded and started to retreat. Thus El Cid won with his astute plan an amazing victory, securing his control over Valencia and further solidifying his new state. Around the same time, King Sancho of Aragon died and his son Pedro succeeded him. As the young king feared an incoming attack by the Almoravids, he rapidly reached out to El Cid with a proposition of friendship, to which Rodrigo agreed. And so, in result, the Kingdom of Aragon and the Principality of Valencia formally entered into an alliance. The next year, Rodrigo campaigned around his state to conquer the castles of Olukau and Serra, two Muslim strongholds, with the intention of safeguarding the surroundings of Valencia. Yet in 1097, the Almoravids gathered a formidable army to reconquer Valencia and avenge their previous defeat. The alliance with Aragon came in handy, as King Pedro marched with his army and joined El Cid at Valencia. Together, the two combined armies would repel the attack of the Almoravids, who wouldn't dare to attack El Cid ever again. Rodrigo would then conquer the Muslim strongholds of Almenara and Sagunto, finally consolidating his dominion over the entire typha of Valencia. This success would be celebrated with the consecration of the old Mosque of Valencia, which was transformed into the Cathedral of Santa Maria. Yet the joy wouldn't last very long, as his son Diego would perish at the Battle of Consuegra while in the service of King Alfonso. The grief caused by the passing of his son, along with his old age, would take a heavy toll on El Cid's health. In 1099, one of his last actions would be to marry his daughters with Count Ramón Berenguer of Barcelona and with Lord Ramirez Sanchez of Pamplona, forging alliances with both of them. Consequently, El Cid would become an ancestor to many kings of Spain, and would leave his state with powerful alliances capable of defending it after he was gone. That same year, Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, known as El Cid Campeador, would die of old age and would be buried at the cathedral that he founded. The state that he created was inherited by his wife Jimena Díaz, who managed to maintain its independence for 3 more years. But in 1102, the Almoravids attacked with a huge army, and the city had to be abandoned. Jimena then travelled back to Castile with the remains of her husband, and El Cid would be finally buried at the monastery of San Pedro de Cardeña. Thus ended the life of one of the most fascinating heroes of the Middle Ages, who remained undefeated throughout his life, who managed to create his own state and become an independent warlord, and who fought for both Christians and Muslims alike as a true knight of 2 worlds. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.